Snow fell in slow, steady sheets across the open plains, turning the lone rancher's world into a quiet white dream. Christmas Eve had always been the same for him, silent, practical, empty of ceremony. He had finished feeding the cattle and was heading back to the house when he noticed two figures standing near the old wooden gate. At first, he thought the cold was playing tricks on his eyes. But as he stepped closer, he saw them clearly. Two young women, identical in every way, dark hair dusted with snow, thin coats pulled tight around their shoulders, eyes wide with both fear and hope. They looked like mirror images, breathing in sync, shivering in the same rhythm. They spoke softly, their English careful but clear, explaining that their car had broken down miles away and the storm had swallowed the road. He hesitated only a second before opening the gate and ushering them inside. The rancher was a man of few words, shaped by years of solitude and hard winters, but he knew the cold could be merciless. Inside the house, the fire crackled to life, and warmth slowly returned color to their faces. They sat close together on the couch, hands folded, glancing at him with shy gratitude. As the kettle boiled and the wind howled outside, he noticed the way they moved. When one smiled, the other followed. When one spoke, the other nodded, as if finishing the thought silently. They introduced themselves, voices nearly overlapping, and thanked him again and again for taking them in. He waved it off, uncomfortable with praise, and busied himself pouring tea. Yet something in the room had shifted. The house, once echoing and bare, felt strangely alive. When the silence grew comfortable, one of the twins leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper, as though afraid the moment might break if spoken too loudly. "We want love with you on Christmas." The words landed gently, but they struck him hard. He froze, teacup halfway to his lips, unsure if he had heard correctly. The other twin met his eyes and nodded, her expression calm, sincere, not playful or teasing. There was no boldness in their request, only vulnerability. The rancher felt his chest tighten. Love was a word he had buried long ago, somewhere beneath broken promises and years of choosing isolation because it hurt less. He searched their faces for misunderstanding, for mischief, but found none. Instead, he saw two people far from home, reaching for warmth that wasn't just from the fire. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, time seemed to slow. He set the cup down carefully, aware of his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he simply sat with them, listening to the wind, watching the flames dance. For the first time in many winters, Christmas felt different, not loud or bright, but quietly significant, as if something fragile and unexpected had just knocked on his door, asking to be let in. Morning arrived slowly on the ranch, the kind of winter morning that felt wrapped in cotton. Pale light filtered through frost-covered windows, and the world outside lay still beneath a thick blanket of snow. The rancher woke earlier than usual, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar sounds in his house. Soft footsteps, murmured voices, a quiet laugh. For a man who had lived alone for years, the presence of others felt strange, almost unreal, as if he might blink and find himself back in silence again. He pulled on his coat and stepped into the kitchen, stopping short when he saw the twins standing side by side at the old wooden table. One was carefully kneading dough, her movements confident and practiced, while the other chopped vegetables with surprising precision. Steam rose from a pot on the stove, carrying a warm, comforting scent that reminded him faintly of long-forgotten family holidays. They looked up together, smiling as if they had been expecting him. They explained, almost apologetically, that cooking was their way of saying thank you. The rancher tried to protest, but they insisted, gently guiding him to sit down. As he watched them work, he became aware of the quiet harmony between them. They rarely spoke to each other, yet they never collided, never repeated tasks. When one reached for a spice, the other had already opened the jar. Their connection was seamless, almost mesmerizing. After breakfast, they insisted on helping with chores. Despite the cold, they followed him outside, bundled in borrowed coats that were far too big for them. One carried feed for the horses, laughing when the wind tugged at her scarf, while the other brushed snow from the barn steps. The rancher found himself watching them more than the work, surprised by how naturally they fit into a life that had always been rigid and routine. As the day went on, they talked more. They spoke of traveling far from home, of losing their parents young, of learning to rely on each other in a world that often treated them as curiosities rather than individuals. They didn't share these stories with bitterness, only quiet honesty. In return, the rancher found himself speaking too, about the ranch, about his late wife, about how the land had been both his refuge and his prison. The words came slowly at first, then more freely, as if something inside him had finally loosened. In the afternoon, snow began to fall again, thicker this time. The twins sat by the window, watching flakes drift down, their shoulders touching. One asked softly if Christmas was always so quiet here. He admitted it was, that he had grown used to it, even convinced himself he preferred it that way. The twins exchanged a look before turning back to him, their expressions thoughtful. "Quiet doesn't have to mean empty," one of them said. The other nodded, resting her chin in her hands. Their words weren't dramatic, but they stayed with him, echoing long after the conversation drifted into silence. As evening approached, the rancher realized something unsettling and comforting all at once. The loneliness he had carried for years felt lighter, not gone, but eased. The house was still small, the world still cold, but now there was laughter in the air and warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. And though he didn't yet know what tomorrow would bring, he found himself hoping, quietly and sincerely, that the twins wouldn't leave too soon. Christmas Eve settled over the ranch like a held breath. The sky deepened into a clear, endless blue, and stars emerged one by one, bright and sharp against the cold. Inside the house, the twins moved with quiet excitement, pulling a small pine branch the rancher had cut earlier into the center of the room. It wasn't much of a tree, just a simple piece of green in a tin bucket, but to them it was enough. They smiled at it as if it were something precious. They began decorating with what little they had. Bits of red thread from their travel bag were tied carefully into bows. Old buttons, long forgotten in a drawer, became ornaments. One of the twins folded scraps of paper into delicate shapes while the other hung them, stepping back often to admire their work. The rancher watched from his chair, amused and oddly moved. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had tried so hard to make Christmas feel special in his home. When the tree was finished, they lit a few candles and dimmed the lamps. Shadows danced across the walls, and the house felt softer, almost gentler. The twins invited him to sit closer, and for a moment he hesitated, then did. They taught him a simple Christmas greeting in their language, laughing kindly when he stumbled over the words. Their laughter was light, unguarded, and it filled the spaces he had never realized were empty. Later, they shared stories of winters from their childhood. They spoke of narrow streets glowing with lantern light, of hands tucked into sleeves for warmth, of listening to their mother hum while snow tapped against the windows. Their voices slowed as the memories grew deeper, tinged with both sweetness and loss. The rancher listened carefully, not interrupting, sensing how much trust it took for them to open these pieces of themselves. When it was his turn, he surprised himself by speaking honestly. He told them about the Christmas when his wife was still alive, how she used to wake early to bake bread, how the house once smelled of cinnamon and hope. He admitted how, after she was gone, the holidays had become something to endure rather than celebrate. As he spoke, his throat tightened, but he didn't stop. The twins listened without looking away, their attention steady and kind. One of them reached out and rested her hand over his, not squeezing, just being there. The other nodded softly, as if to say his words mattered. In that simple moment, he felt understood in a way he hadn't in years. Not pitied, not fixed, just seen. Outside, the wind brushed against the walls, gentle now, as if even the storm had softened. The clock ticked toward midnight, and the twins exchanged a glance before standing. They held out their hands to him, inviting him to join them near the little tree. Together, they stood in the candlelight, three figures sharing the quiet. No promises were made, no plans spoken aloud. Yet as the final minutes of Christmas Eve slipped away, the rancher felt something settle in his chest, a fragile sense of belonging. The loneliness that had once filled every corner of his life no longer felt so absolute. In its place was warmth, subtle but real, glowing softly like the candles, enough to believe that even in the coldest season, something new could begin. The night deepened after midnight, and the ranch fell into a silence so complete it felt almost alive. The twins had gone to rest in the spare room, their quiet footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving the rancher alone once more. He sat by the dying fire, staring into the embers as memories and doubts stirred. For years, solitude had been his armor. It had protected him from disappointment, from hope, from the pain of wanting something that might disappear. Now, with two unexpected guests sleeping under his roof, that armor felt heavy and unnecessary, and that frightened him. He wondered what he could truly offer them. A weathered house, a life shaped by routine, a heart worn thin by loss. He feared that by letting himself feel again, he might be inviting grief back into a place that had finally learned to survive without it. The thought kept him awake long after the fire burned low. Sometime before dawn, a soft knock broke the stillness. When he opened the door, the twins stood there together, wrapped in blankets, their expressions calm but concerned. They had sensed his restlessness, they said, the way one senses a change in the air before snow falls. He stepped aside, and they entered quietly, sitting with him near the cold hearth. Without rushing, they spoke. They told him they weren't asking for certainty or promises. They had lived too long knowing life could change overnight to demand guarantees. What they wanted, they explained, was simple and rare: to be present, to share warmth, to choose kindness in a moment when the world felt vast and indifferent. Love, to them, was not a claim, but an offering. Their words eased something tight inside him. He confessed his fear of failing them, of opening a door he might not know how to keep open. The twins listened carefully, neither interrupting nor dismissing his worries. One reminded him that strength wasn't measured by what one could give, but by the courage to share what one had. The other added that staying alone forever was its own kind of risk. As the first light of morning crept through the window, they sat in silence together. No one tried to fill it. The quiet felt different now, no longer empty, but full of understanding. The rancher realized that for years he had confused loneliness with safety. In avoiding pain, he had also avoided joy. When the twins finally rose to return to their room, one paused at the doorway. She turned back and smiled softly, saying that whatever happened next, this Christmas would always matter to them. The other nodded, her eyes shining in the low light. They left him there, changed in ways he couldn't yet fully name. He stood and opened the curtains as the sun rose over the snow-covered land. The ranch looked the same as it always had, white and quiet and demanding. But inside him, something had shifted. The future was still uncertain, still fragile. Yet for the first time in many winters, he didn't feel the urge to face it alone. Christmas morning arrived gently, as if the world itself didn't want to disturb what had formed during the night. Pale sunlight spilled across the snow-covered fields, turning the ranch into a landscape of soft gold and white. The rancher stood on the porch for a long moment, breathing in the cold air, feeling a calm he hadn't known in years. Behind him, the house stirred with quiet movement, a sound that still felt new and welcome. The twins joined him outside, wrapped in thick coats, their breath rising in small clouds as they stepped onto the porch. They stood close, shoulders brushing his, and together they watched the sun climb higher. No one spoke at first. Words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive, against the peacefulness of the moment. The rancher realized that he wasn't bracing himself for the day anymore. He wasn't counting the hours until Christmas would pass. He was simply there. Inside, they shared a simple breakfast, laughing softly over mismatched plates and burned toast. The twins exchanged playful glances, teasing each other in their own language, and then translated the jokes for him, delighted when he laughed along. The house felt warm in a way it never had before, not just heated, but alive. Even the old walls seemed to hold the sound of their voices. Later, they exchanged small gifts. The rancher offered each of them a carved wooden charm he had made years ago but never given to anyone. He explained that he used to carve when the nights felt too long. The twins accepted the charms with care, their expressions unexpectedly emotional. In return, they gave him a folded paper crane, carefully made, its creases sharp and deliberate. They told him it was a symbol of hope, of journeys taken and those still ahead. As the day unfolded, they walked the land together. The twins asked about the cattle, the fences, the history of the ranch, listening with genuine interest. The rancher found himself speaking with pride instead of weariness, seeing his life reflected back through their curiosity. He realized that nothing about his world was small or insignificant, it had simply been waiting to be shared. In the afternoon, as clouds drifted lazily across the sky, the twins grew quiet. They spoke of the road ahead, of places they still needed to go. There was no sadness in their words, only honesty. The rancher felt the familiar ache of impending separation, but it didn't harden him as it once might have. Instead, he felt grateful, for the time given, for the connection made. As evening fell, they stood once more on the porch, watching the light fade. The twins thanked him, not just for shelter, but for trust, for listening, for choosing presence over fear. He nodded, unable to find words that felt big enough. He only knew that something lasting had been planted, even if it would grow in ways he couldn't predict. When the stars appeared, Christmas drew to a close. The ranch was still quiet, still white and demanding. But it was no longer empty. And neither was he.